CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson.
Good evening. A major court ruling today in a battle between doctors and the government of British Columbia. The province has been limiting the number of doctors who can practice, claiming BC already has too many doctors. But the BC Court of Appeal says the government action violates doctors' rights. Today's ruling comes following a long fight by young doctors with help from colleagues all across the country. Henry Kowalski reports.
It was a champagne celebration. This group of young doctors had just beaten the provincial government in BC's highest court.
Specialists.
3 years ago, BC stopped giving all new doctors a billing number.
They would be advised that they would not receive a billing number.
Without a billing number, doctors like Christiane Maxon couldn't bill the medical services plan for their services. They couldn't get paid. They could only earn money by substituting for vacationing or ill doctors who had a number. The province called it a way to keep health costs down. The 1,000 doctors who had been shut out called it wrong.
It's definitely unfair. Nowhere else has one small group been made to bear the brunt of fiscal restraint like this.
They said the system most hurt the growing number of female doctors.
Yeah, traditionally most doctors were male. However, now it's almost 50-50 and the numbers are starting to switch, and if the government doesn't let the young doctors in, the ratios aren't going to be able to improve.
Now BC's Court of Appeal has sided with the doctors. It says they were deprived of liberty, and BC was so unfair as to violate fundamental justice. The health minister says if all those new doctors come on stream, it will drive up the cost of health care.
But I believe that we're talking in a very short period of time in the terms of an extra $100 million.
Other provinces were watching this case with some interest. They hope to use the BC system to keep their own costs down. BC may still appeal to the Supreme Court, but it will be an uphill battle. Today's decision by a panel of 5 judges was unanimous. Henry Kowalski, CTV News, Vancouver.
An explosion rocked a British Army base in West Germany today. 3 soldiers and a civilian were injured in the blast. And last night in Northern Ireland, 2 more people were shot to death. As Roger Smith reports, they are the 5th and 6th victims this week of a new IRA campaign against British military targets.
In a week of death, this was just a close call. Only 4 people injured. The explosion shattered windows at the Army base school, but no children were there because of holidays. Police say it was a bomb set just outside the perimeter fence. The IRA has warned civilians to stay away from British soldiers everywhere. And last night, that message was reinforced with bullets. 2 construction workers were shot after leaving jobs at a police base in Northern Ireland. The victims had apparently been warned not to work there. This escalated campaign of intimidation against civilians was met with defiance.
There's the right to live, and secondly, the right to work. And we therefore reject any so-called authority from paramilitaries to instruct builders what work they will do and won't do.
As Britain's Minister for Northern Ireland held emergency talks, angry Protestants called for a war on the IRA with a return to capital punishment and to detention without trial.
Taking 300 to maybe even 400 people off the streets, people that we know are the perpetrators of crime, would be a benefit to both communities. It would take the criminals out of their midst and would give them a respite and a breathing space.
But Prime Minister Thatcher rejected that option as no sure way to end the grief seen again at today's funerals for 2 soldiers killed this week. More than 2,000 people have died since British troops intervened 19 years ago in Northern Ireland's war between Catholics and Protestants. Yet still, the all-too-common sight of grieving widows at the grave. Roger Smith, CTV News, London.
Palestinian leaders in Israel's occupied territories are considering a new tactic. They may issue a declaration of independence for the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It follows the decision by King Hussein of Jordan to sever his country's ties with the areas. Hilary Bowker reports.
Interviewed on Israeli TV tonight, Palestinian journalist Ziad Abu Zayed said resistance leaders in the occupied territories are seriously considering a dramatic initiative.
To proclaim a declaration of independence.
Palestinian leaders say the move is designed to fill the vacuum left by King Hussein. They say Palestinian groups, including doctors and lawyers, would administer the region on a daily basis. This setup could provide a window of opportunity for local contacts with Israeli authorities, bypassing their refusal to deal with the PLO. But Palestinian leaders say they would coordinate with the PLO government in exile. All Palestinians in the occupied territories, including those interned by Israel, would be asked to sign the declaration. What local Palestinians hope will work in their favor is an implicit recognition of Israel in the declaration. It calls for a state within the occupied territories, not inside Israel's generally accepted boundaries.
Instead of Israel always calling on the Palestinians to recognize Israel, the Palestinians are going to say, we recognize you, and we're declaring a state, now it's your turn to recognize us.
Israel is unlikely to welcome the initiative.
No, I don't think this is a serious move. I think that this is essentially a publicity stunt generated either in the West Bank or from outside by the PLO or circles close to the PLO.
But Palestinian leaders believe the rest of the world will react more favorably and, in turn, put pressure on Israel. Hillary Bowker, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
One of the most wanted men in the United States has been ordered extradited from Canada. A Vancouver judge ruled today that Charles McVey should be sent back to the U.S. to face fraud charges. McVey is also charged in the U.S. with selling high-tech computer equipment to the Soviet Union. McVey was arrested last summer in the Yukon, and officials say it could still take months to return him to the United States. There were two decisions in Washington today that may give the George Bush presidential campaign a big boost. The first was in the Iran-Contra conspiracy case. The judge has delayed the trial of former White House aide Oliver North. This means trial evidence that could possibly damage the Bush campaign cannot surface now until after the November presidential election. The second decision was by U.S. Treasury Secretary James Baker. He is resigning from the cabinet to take charge of the Bush campaign for the White House. Baker has been involved in the last 3 presidential campaigns, and Bush praised him for his judgment and experience. Baker reciprocated with some kind words about Bush, but acknowledged the vice president is trailing behind Democratic candidate Michael Dukakis in public opinion polls.